The following interview was conducted with Wally as part of the Clinch Coalition's 25th anniversary oral history project. This interview team includes Melanie Marcano, Aaron Bass, and Helena Nguyen. This interview took place in the library of the University of Virginia's College at Wise on November 18th, 2021. So to start off, where are you from?
So I'm originally from a little town called Flowery Branch, Georgia, which no one has heard of, but it's a small town in the North Georgia mountains, about 3 or 4 hours south of Wise. So grew up in North Georgia.
What type of community was it like?
Growing up, it was more kind of like Southwest Virginia is now. So it was a small town. We didn't have coal mining, but it was kind of a textile town. So we had textile mills that mimicked some of the coal mining a little bit. And then as I grew older, right before I moved here, it became more of a suburban town. So Atlanta kind of grew out and absorbed some of the small towns there. So it's kind of transitioned from being more like Southwest Virginia is today to more of kind of a suburban type setting.
What was your family life like, if you'd like to talk about that?
Yeah. So I came from one side of family of farmers. So my dad's side of the family was a big agricultural family, mostly with poultry farming down in middle Georgia. And then my mom's side of the family had lived in the mountains historically and had moved to the town that I grew up in because of the textile mills. So they worked there in the textile mills and the textile mill villages, kind of like the coal camps that we have here. And so I kind of came from that background, kind of a working class family / farming family. And then by the time I was born, we were, I guess, kind of more of a typical middle class family. So my mom worked in education when I was younger, and my dad still worked in agriculture, but he worked for the poultry industry, kind of as a chicken vet, I guess, is a less than formal way to put it. So he went around to different farms and helped to service those farms. So I grew up in kind of a family with a mixed background, but still had those deep roots in the Appalachian region, just not here in Southwest Virginia.
And you think like their careers and all that influenced how you are today?
Yeah, I think so. Initially, before I came here to work at the college, when I was an undergrad, I first wanted to be a high school teacher, and that was kind of my passion. I got about halfway through an education program and then realized that I was also a huge science nerd. So I decided to go into biology for grad school, and I think that kind of reflects a mix of where I'm from. So my mom being in education kind of pushed me that way, and then my dad, even though he's not a research scientist, he still was in a science field. So I think that influence, kind of combined to push me into the career that I'm in right now.
What schools did you go to?
I went to a school called Piedmont College for my bachelor's degree. It's a small school that's about the size of UVA Wise, but a private liberal arts school instead of a public liberal arts school. It's in North Georgia. I think its name is Piedmont University now, so they changed their name. But a small school there, and then went to the University of Alabama for my PhD in Tuscaloosa.
Was your community and family, did they have any ties to the coalition?
No. I really got involved with the Clinch Coalition after I moved up here. So I moved here to work at the college in 2012. And then I was trying to think earlier about the exact year that I got involved with the Clinch Coalition. I think it was 2016. So either 2015 or 2016. I got involved then, mostly after moving to the area and getting to meet some of the people here and getting familiar with some of the community issues. That's what kind of pushed me to get involved with them.
So getting into how you got involved in the coalition, since you're talking about when, what do you think, what did you think about it before joining?
Yeah, so I think, I'm trying to think about my interactions with them before I formally became a board member, but I had participated through their Naturalist Rally, which is an event that they hold annually every fall. That's kind of an educational event to educate about the High Knob region and the wildlife that we have here in the ecosystems. I got involved there as a presenter initially, so I gave some guided hikes on salamanders in the region, which is what my academic expertise is in, and really liked what the coalition was doing in terms of educating the public and trying to connect people to the outdoors. It's a big passion of mine, kind of outside of work. And so really got passionate about what they were doing there, and then got to know some of the people who were on the board just through the community. And that's what led to me joining on the board. They asked if I'd be interested, and I said definitely, because it aligned with what I like to do personally and also professionally. A lot of my work here at the college overlaps with what they do.
Was there any type of process you had to do to join, or were they just like?
No, we have a board of directors, so you have to be nominated to the board, and then the board basically votes you on. So I believe I went to an initial meeting to get familiar with the board and kind of learn how it worked. Was asked if I was interested and said yes, and then they nominated me. And then the next meeting, the next month, was where they, formally voted to name me on.
Are there any specific events or experiences from the coalition that you would really like to share?
Yeah, I mentioned the Naturalist Rally, and I think that's a really good one because that's one of the big community engagement events that we've done historically. The pandemic kind of interrupted that because we've historically done that as a big in-person event up on High Knob, which is kind of at the center of what the Clinch Coalition does. And that event has always been really successful, and it's transitioned more into a virtual component with the pandemic. But I really like that event. I think it's kind of the signature event for what the Clinch Coalition does. I think it really stresses those community connections pretty well. And then if I'm being selfish, another event that the Clinch Coalition does is the High Knob Hellbender 10K race that maybe some other people in the coalition have mentioned. But my wife, Katie, actually puts that on. She's a big runner in the area, and she founded that race about 7 years ago, I guess now, 7 or 8 years ago. She puts that on every year, and it financially benefits the Clinch Coalition, but it's also kind of an educational event to bring people to High Knob and educate them about the region. So I like seeing that where we can bring people locally and from outside the region all together to experience what we have here. So those would be my two big, I think, signature events or initiatives that the Clinch Coalition does.
What was it like doing Clinch Coalition events virtually?
It hasn't been as tough as I thought. I think part of that is bias because teaching here, we were already virtual by the time they came around. So we went virtual in the spring of 2020, and I'd kind of been used to doing everything over Zoom and that type of thing. So for me, it was not that difficult and not that different. I think for other people, it kind of was. Maybe they had not had that experience with doing so virtually, but it's been successful, and I think we have a broader reach because we have a number of educational videos that we'll put up live for that event that people can watch, but we'll also put them on YouTube and on our website. So I think that's kind of given us a way outside of the one-day event that we do to broaden our reach and catch people all throughout the year, which is a big benefit. So I would prefer to still do it in person, but I'm glad that we have had success doing it virtually as well. It's safer with the pandemic.
So what do you do for the coalition?
Currently, I'm their vice president. So I've been the vice president for about, and again, I'll get the number of years wrong, but I think about 3 years now. So since 2018, time kind of all runs together. So I work with them there, kind of help with the day-to-day operations of the board, help them to make decisions with the governing board. And then also help out with some of the educational events, like I mentioned before, the Naturalist Rally, the 10K race that we do. And then also help out with what we call Forest Watch. I'm not sure how familiar you are with that part of the organization, but that's kind of why the Clinch Coalition was founded, was to be sort of a watchdog group for environmental issues in the region. So we monitor some of the timber projects up on the National Forest that the Forest Service does. If residents have water quality concerns from really anything in the region, then we take that information in and make sure we can pass it up to the right environmental agencies. They can investigate and see if there's an issue going on there. So I help out a good bit with that as well, kind of with the citizen forest watch type side of things.
So can you tell us more about the members of the Clinch Coalition?
Yeah, so the overall membership, I always get the numbers wrong. I think we've had over 100 people associated with the Clinch Coalition, but not all of those people are like dues paying members at the moment. So those people are on our mailing list, they get our newsletters, they get info from us. But we have, I would say, probably 15 to 20 really core board members that are really involved and really engaged. And they're really from all different walks of life. So most of those people are based locally here in Wise County and surrounding counties. Some of them are down in Northeast Tennessee or in other parts of Virginia. But it's really a pretty even cross-section of the community. So we've got people that have lived here their whole lives, people like me who are kind of transplants who have moved in and kind of have this as their adopted home. People from different careers, we've had people from different political backgrounds, so it's a pretty inclusive group. Overall in the membership, I think the big uniting thing is a love for the outdoors and a love for the natural resources that we've got here kind of in the High Knob region.
So getting more into which events and activities you've planned and done, can you tell us more about your work concerning the spearhead trails?
Yeah, so that's part of the Forest Watch work that we've done, and that came on our radar, I guess 2018 was the first year that kind of came up, and I'm not sure how familiar you are with the background of some of that, but that is a kind of state-run sort of trail system, so the state funds recreational development all across the region in Wise County and surrounding counties. And that's been done kind of as a move to transition away from the coal industry, so away from an extractive economy and more towards a tourism economy. And while we're supportive of that, we began to get, again, starting in like the spring of 2018, a number of local residents complaining about water quality damage on the trail system, and that was happening from improper construction practices, things that weren't using proper erosion and sediment controls. And that can cause sediment, mud and silt, that type of thing to run off into streams and damage wildlife and water quality. So to make a very long story short, we kind of began pushing some of that up to the state regulatory agencies and some federal regulatory agencies, and filing complaints, letting them know that citizens had concerns. And it's been a really long road to get there, but we're to a point now where there's a little more oversight of that initiative. So the regulatory agencies are putting some more checks and balances in on the group. And then also they've closed some of the more problematic trails that have had some of these citizen complaints. So we've kind of been, I guess the best way to put it is a voice for some of the local citizens that had concerns about the trail system. And then we elevate, those concerns to the agencies and kind of work with them to see if we can get some kind of outcome. So that's a very long 3-year story condensed into like 30 seconds. That's been the approach that we've used with that issue.
So how does the coalition come to decisions on those type of issues?
Yeah, it's mostly kind of a consensus-based model. So, when we have an issue that's brought to us, usually somebody like me will kind of be the conduit from the community. And then we take that up to our executive committee, which is myself, the president, Sharon Fisher, and then our treasurer, Gina Kaiser, who I think maybe has been interviewed, and then our secretary, Bill Harris. Those groups of people, or that group, will share those concerns. We'll discuss what the issue is. And then if it feels like something that the coalition needs to take on, then we'll move that up to the board, and the full board will discuss it and kind of vote to take it on as an issue, or if there's some type of decision that needs to be made there, then the board will discuss that and vote on it and approve it, and then we'll take it to an agency, or we'll decide on some kind of action. So it's really a collaborative type of decision making. I think most nonprofits kind of follow that model where you've got the board voting to take on certain actions, but usually the individual board members are the conduits to the community, and then the board kind of decides as a group about what we're going to do.
Can you tell us about the recent Leave a Tip reporting tool for environmental damage?
Yeah, that has been a really successful program, and the credit for that should really go to Jayla Tyler. So she's one of our staff members that we hired on a couple years ago. And that really grew out of some work that she has done to kind of grow community connections and grow some of our online presence. And the idea behind that, which I think kind of is a foundational reason that the Clinch Coalition exists, is that there's a lot of people in the communities around Southwest Virginia who experience issues every now and then. It could be water quality issues, or trespassing on private property, or maybe a concern about some type of resource extraction activity that's happening nearby. And a lot of those people will have those concerns, but they maybe don't know where to go to have those concerns heard, or maybe they've tried speaking to a regulatory agency and they've been kind of brushed off and kind of ignored with some of those concerns. So the Leave a Tip tool grew out of that kind of issue that we continually deal with about how can we harvest some of those concerns from people, how can we create a formal avenue to receive some of those, to where people can share those with us, even if it's something that's not a valid regulatory issue where there needs to be some kind of investigation happen. We can at least be aware of that, and we can pass it up to the agencies and say, hey, can you take a look at this? And that way there's more of a formal group as opposed to just a single landowner going to those agencies and saying, hey, this needs to be on your radar. So we've had that online. It's an online tool. You can just go to it. If you have a concern, you can type in what the tool is or what the problem is. You have photos, videos, that type of thing. You can reach out to us with those. And then we receive that. Typically, Jayla, who I mentioned, will pick that up through her end. And then we'll pass that up to the board, the executive committee, and kind of go from there on what needs to happen. But it's been very successful, and we've had some of the trail issues that I mentioned come through there. That's one of the ways we become aware of those. Some issues on the Pound River, which is one of the Ohio River headwater tributaries just to our north. Some people have had some water quality concerns there that they passed up to us. So it's been, I would say, overwhelmingly successful since it went live about maybe a year ago, I guess. So
we were looking through the YouTube page that the Clinch Valley Coalition made, and saw that there was a video that you spoke on black bears. Would you like to explain their importance to Southwest region of Virginia?
Yeah, so that grew out of the pandemic, honestly, and me panicking here at the college about how in the world was I going to teach when the pandemic first hit, because back when that happened in the spring of 2020, it kind of got thrown on us that we were going to be teaching virtually. So part of what I did when the college was closed for the few weeks after we decided to make the transition to virtual instruction is reached out to a number of natural resource professionals in the region, and Seth Thompson, who's in that video, is one of those people. And basically kind of had like a digital Zoom chat over different topics of interest in the environment here. And spoke with Seth because he's our local wildlife biologist with the Department of Wildlife Resources. And he also works really closely with bears, and figured that would be a really good topic because bears are one of those misunderstood species, I think, that we have here. They're a really important part of the ecosystem. But unfortunately, when people see them, it's usually when they're in their yard eating their trash. So people are yelling at them and screaming at them, trying to get them to go away. And then also, they're a species that has come back into the region just a couple of decades ago. We didn't have that many bears here at all. So I figured that would be a good topic for people to hear about and kind of learn about. So that was kind of what led to that video, and hopefully it communicated some of their value to the ecosystem here. But that kind of grew out of the whole issues surrounding the pandemic about how can we get information to people when we're all separate and we're all in lockdown. So that was kind of where that video grew out of.
Can you explain the context around the lawsuit regarding the National Environmental Policy Act?
Ooh, yes, that's a can of worms that we could talk about for a while. But so the National Environmental Policy Act, kind of where that comes from for some context, that's just called NEPA for short in the environmental world. And that's a law that was put into place kind of for a few reasons. And one was that when a federal agency or a group is using federal money that comes from taxpayers, one of the bedrock ideas under that law is that the taxpayers who fund those projects should have a say in how those projects are managed, and there should be some transparency about the environmental controls that are going to be used there. So one of the things that NEPA requires agencies to do, like the Forest Service or even like a road that's being built here in the area that's using federal funding, they have to do an environmental analysis where they look to see, if we're building a road or if we're going to harvest timber from high knob, what are the possible impacts going to be, and then what are we going to do to try to minimize those impacts? They call those alternatives with NEPA. And then you publish that. There's typically a chance for the public, the residents in that area or other people who are just funding the work through their tax money to review those plans and then give feedback. Because a lot of times, especially around here, local residents are kind of the boots on the ground, sort of, that know what the issues are and what issues could come out of a project. So you do a public comment period with the rules under NEPA, and then the agency will look at those comments and say, what are the public's concerns? What do they want to see? Is there a way that members of the public think that we could do this project better, possibly? And then they go back to the drawing board and take those comments into account. And when it works, the whole NEPA process is kind of a way to improve the sustainability of different projects. Also helps with environmental justice concerns, because you're making sure that if there are underrepresented groups in your community, they have a chance to be heard, and that way you can adjust the project to benefit those. So the lawsuit that we've had has really come out of some changes that occurred. It was during the Trump administration, and I'm forgetting the year. It's right at the end of the administration, I think. So around like 2018, 2019. They decided to roll back a lot of those protections, kind of as a pro-industry, kind of streamlining type move, to basically make it quicker to get projects through without having those reviews and without having some of those environmental considerations. That concerned us just as an environmental group, because we want to make sure that the most intense environmental protections that need to be there are used. But also that really concerned us here in Appalachia, because we do have a lot of underrepresented communities here that don't have their voices heard a lot. And some of the things that were put into those changes to the act more or less kind of cut out or limited a lot of the public input that you were going to have into those projects. So ourselves and a number of other environmental organizations across the South, I forget how many exactly are on that lawsuit, but we signed on to that lawsuit, which is being argued by the Southern Environmental Law Center, which is one of our big partners. They also represent us legally. And that lawsuit has been active now, I guess, for about a year, maybe a year and a half. It was initially kind of ended in court at the first review, but since there's kind of an appeal to that that's being pushed through, the Biden administration has brought back some of the regulations that were rolled back, but we want to see all of those regulations put back in, because those are good safeguards to make sure projects are done responsibly. So it's kind of a big, convoluted legal type situation with a lot of legalese, but essentially our involvement there has been trying to preserve the public input that people can put into different projects that are funded by the federal government in our area.
Would you say that the coalition has trouble keeping up with public concerns?
Not really too much right now. I think right now we're okay. If we started to get a lot more, we might have issues in the future if we were just getting fire hosed with complaints. But right now I feel like we have a pretty good system and a pretty dedicated group of staff and board members where when something comes up, even if the person who receives it, like if I get a complaint, I don't know where it needs to go, we have people on the board that I can talk to and they can say, yeah, this needs to go to the Department of Environmental Quality or this needs to go to the Department of Forestry. So I feel like currently we have a pretty good system to handle that stuff and make sure it gets to where it needs to go. Sometimes it doesn't get resolved quickly, but that's more sometimes the agencies that we pass it to where it gets slowed down as opposed to within us.
So going on to more specific questions aimed at you. On your faculty page, we saw that you were awarded the High-Tech Green Award. Would you like to elaborate on that experience?
Yeah, that was an award. Gosh, it makes me feel so old because that was like 2014 or something, I think, when we got that. That was an award that we got for a student-led project that we did here that was a lot of fun that's still going on now. There's a platform online called iNaturalist. I don't know if y'all are familiar with that platform, but it's kind of like almost an Instagram for wildlife nerds, where if you're out hiking, here on campus, and you see a cool animal or a plant, you can just take a photo of it with your smartphone. And if you have that app, you can upload that photo to the app, and it shares your observation with other wildlife users, so it's kind of a way to interact. But also, the users of that app can help you identify that organism, so it kind of helps tell you what that organism was. And then your record actually gets passed up to this big global repository of wildlife observations so that researchers like me can use that as data. So we basically kind of start up an initiative here around that platform to get people out and on the trails collecting wildlife observations, and that's what got us that particular award, was those efforts to connect people through some online means with the outdoors here. So that was really cool. We got to go have basically a fancy dinner and give a talk about some of the work that we were doing. So that was a lot of fun and a good honor to get, but it was really more the students, I guess, than me that should have gotten that award because it was really their work. They're the ones that kind of went into the work behind it.
You're also given the Outstanding Watershed Educator Award. So what about that experience?
Yeah, that was similar. I think it was actually the same project that got that award. That was the Upper Tennessee River Roundtable that gave us that. They're a really excellent nonprofit that's been working in the region for a while. They've worked with us on some stuff with the Clinch Coalition before, but they are their own separate group. And they primarily work on the Clinch, the Powell, and the Holston River watersheds, improving water quality there. So they gave us that award partially for that project and also for some work that we've done training educators here in the region about environmental concerns. So that was a similarly kind of cool thing to get a few years ago. And it was kind of similar. We got to go to a banquet and stand up in front of people and feel fancy for a little while and get an award. So that was a good experience too.
What type of experiences do you have with your partner organizations?
Oh yeah, so within the Clinch Coalition or just in general?
In general.
Yeah, I think it's overwhelmingly positive here in Southwest Virginia. I think that's one of the benefits of having the small town atmosphere here is that everyone kind of knows each other and the different nonprofits that are working in the group. We kind of know what the other nonprofits are doing, and a lot of the times we'll sit on the boards of multiple nonprofits at the same time. So I think there's a good network of partner organizations here that interact pretty well. And I think that gives us a lot more success when it comes to individual projects because we know, if we don't have expertise in our group or for a project that we're doing, we know there's another group out there that probably does, and we've got those connections and we can tap into them. So I feel like the kind of close-knit small town atmosphere that we have here is a big plus for the kind of work that we do.
So we also saw that one of your research interests is biodiversity conservation. So how is your work with the Clinch Valley Coalition related to that?
Oh yeah, so it's really, really strongly tied to it. So my academic background, I primarily work with salamanders. That's what people at the college usually know me as, is the salamander weirdo that works a lot with them. But really my background is kind of more in land management and conservation. So back when I did my PhD, for example, I worked with reptiles and amphibians in Alabama. but we were working with the U.S. Forest Service because they were managing this huge national forest that they had down in that part of Alabama, specifically for a type of pine forest that occurs there. So they were burning the forest at certain intervals and they were logging at others. And we were trying to figure out for them, how did those land management activities impact the wildlife and the biodiversity that lives there? And a lot of that work has kind of transitioned up to my work here at the college in Southwest Virginia, where we still work with the Forest Service pretty heavily. We work with a number of other state and federal agencies, trying to figure out how the way that we're using the landscape here has impacts on wildlife, and then also how those agencies can improve their practices to benefit wildlife the most. And a good example of how things kind of overlap with the Clinch Coalition. One of the animals I work with is called the green salamander, which is, like the name suggests, a little bright green salamander that's about that long. And it actually is currently under review for possibly getting listed under the Endangered Species Act. So it's right before becoming an endangered species. And so the Forest Service and other land management agencies, when they want to log an area or they want to introduce prescribed fire to an area, by law, they have to take into account some of these sensitive species, they call them, on that site to see how they can minimize impacts. So my work with students here, we've gone out, we've surveyed some of those sites, we've done some kind of ecological work, some habitat analyses to figure out what it is about those places that are good for that species. And then we give that information to the decision makers with the federal agencies like the Forest Service. And in the case of that green salamander, they've actually tweaked their rules a little bit for their management projects to benefit that species more. And that's a big interest to the Clinch Coalition because we want to make sure that Forest Service projects are done as sustainably as possible. So that's been a place where I can kind of take my work with the students here. And even though we're not working directly with the Clinch Coalition, the work that we're doing can still benefit them. So I think there's a lot of overlap. And then just, education in general, when we're doing educational work here, a lot of our community education work with the Clinch Coalition is really similar in terms of the topics that we cover. So I would say there's a large amount of overlap between what we do here and then what I do with the Clinch Coalition.
Were there any other projects that overlapped with the Clinch Coalition that you would like to talk about?
Let me see. So the green salamander thing has been the biggest. The Iron Activist project I mentioned has been a big one as well, because that was a kind of community engagement project that we've done. Right now we're doing a lot more work on former surface mines in the area. And the Clinch Coalition has not been as engaged with coal industry impacts as some other nonprofits in the region have historically. But some of that work still has overlap because we're trying to understand right now how do different wildlife species use former surface mines here in the region. And as an example today, I was just out before the rain behind campus getting some trail camera data from our mine here on campus. And we've got a population of beavers that has lived in the wetland back there for 10 years now or more. So that kind of information I think can help even groups like the Clinch Coalition going forward better reach out to different agencies in the region or different stakeholders and inform them about here's some things you can do on your property that can benefit the environment going forward or benefit wildlife going forward. So most of it has been based around the green salamander work and the community work, but basically everything that we do here with land management I think can help with what the Clinch Coalition does.
Is there any youth involvement in the Clinch Valley Coalition?
Not as much as we'd like. So I would say probably maybe 60-70% of our board is more kind of late career people or retirees that are super dedicated and have really strong ties here. But one of the things we would like to do is grow some of the youth involvement. I'm one of the youngest people on the board, for example, and I'm 37, so I'm not necessarily young anymore by any stretch. So we've had some people from the college get involved in the past, but that's been difficult because people come through the college for 4 or 5 years and then they typically move on to grad school or to a job somewhere else. So the youth involvement that we've had has been great, but it hasn't been long-term involvement as people kind of move out and move on to different parts of their life. So I think that's one thing that we could do to probably grow the organization more in the future is, get some people on the board who are college age or just after, or even high school involvement, that type of thing, I think would be good. So that's one area I think where we maybe been a little weak historically, but I think we can build it up.
What are current issues that the Clinch Valley Coalition are working on at the moment?
Yeah, so the NEPA issue, the National Environmental Policy Act, is one of those. The ATV trails issue is another, so we're still engaging on that, trying to make sure that water quality issues are addressed and that citizen complaints are heard. There's some projects on the national forest that we monitor as well, so I wouldn't really take an adversarial stance with the Forest Service where we just oppose everything they do. And so when they propose a project, we try to work with them to make sure that the concerns of the local community and the citizens are heard. And there's a few projects right now, and I'm blanking on the names for each one of them, but one is the Turkey Cove project, which is an area kind of over near the Lee and Scott County line as you're heading towards Kingsport on US 23. Up on the ridge above there, they're managing some habitat for wildlife, so we're kind of monitoring that project to see how it goes. There's a project called the Nettle Patch as well that we've been involved with pretty heavily over the last, I'll say 5 years or so. And that's a big area on the north side of High Knob, kind of like between the High Knob Tower and Norton and Coburn. And that's a project where they're doing some logging, they're also doing some prescribed burning, that type of thing that they proposed. So we worked kind of with them and engaged with them through the planning process of that project to make it more sustainable. And now they're actually going out and doing some timbering, so we're monitoring that to make sure that everything holds up to the standards of their plan. So monitoring some projects, working with the Forest Service, and then also engaging on some of that federal legislation type stuff. That's mostly where we are right now.
So can you tell us more about the coalition's interaction with the regulatory agencies?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of a mixed bag is maybe the best way to put it. Sometimes the agencies are really responsive, and that comes down, I think, to personal relationships. So if there's somebody in the board who is friends with or knows someone that works for a regulatory agency, they may have kind of an existing rapport there, sort of, so they can engage with them and get their concerns heard pretty easily. Other times it's kind of more adversarial. So a good example with the ATV trail issue that we've been dealing with, the Department of Environmental Quality is one of the main regulatory agencies that we engage with there. And they've been a little more resistant to hear citizen complaints and investigate some of those complaints. We don't know really why. Political pressure may be part of that. That's something that happens a lot in this part of the state. But there it's been more of, I guess the best way to put it is a journey to get some of those things investigated. And again, our idea there has been just to make sure that when citizens have complaints, even if they're not valid, someone that's in a position of authority takes a look at what the citizens are concerned about, just to see if there's something that needs correcting. And that's been where a lot of the holdups happen. I think agencies are just understaffed and they're really stressed for time, especially with the pandemic. There's a million restrictions, just like there are on us here at the college they have to deal with. So navigating some of that stuff and navigating political relationships sometimes is the tough part of that, I would say. But overwhelmingly, it's a positive when we interact with those agencies. They tend to at least respond to us and get back to us on those complaints.
So within the Clinch Coalition, what do you see for the future of it?
I think the future looks pretty good. So in my time, I've been with the board now for probably like 5 or 6 years, going on 6 years. The coalition has definitely grown. So we've seen kind of a shift in membership, but there's been some renewed community interest. We've recently gotten some new funding to help grow the organization, and we brought some staff members on. They've just been great. They're doing some wonderful stuff for us. So I think we aren't necessarily growing in a huge way yet, but we're right there. So we've got the groundwork laid and the foundation laid to grow our membership, grow our funding sources. So get some different funding sources to support what we're doing. And then also, grow the scope of our engagement in the region to make sure we engage more people and grow both some of the watchdog stuff that we do and the educational work that we do. I think we're kind of right there, kind of primed almost to grow some of that.
Is there anything else you want to share about your involvement with Clinch Valley Coalition?
I don't think so. I think that covered just about everything, other than just to say that it's a wonderful group to work with. It's a really great group of folks, and a good way, I think, with any kind of community organization, not just the Clinch Coalition, but it's a good way if you do live in a community to get connected to people who share your goals. Also, people who are different, because there are people from different walks of life than I come from that are part of the group. So I think it's been a really enriching experience, I guess would be the way to put it, to be involved with the group, because you get to work with people to do good things and engage people and educate people. So I would just add that my experience has been positive with them. It's a great group.
That's really great. So I think that wraps it up, but thank you so much for this interview and everything you shared with us. We really appreciate it. And that's it for today.
Awesome. Thank you.